This is Joseph, patriarch of the 12 tribes of Israel, and his Technicolor Dreamcoat. It's always kind of portrayed something ugly. The actual verse. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a vari-colored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, so they hated him. And that's actually where we're going with this. This is a 3-part series. Part 1, we're going to do some background in Joseph. And then part 2, we're going to read the Apocryphal Testament of Joseph. And then part 3, we're going to tie it all together. How I got here was, real quick, I was reading Psalm 104:5. He set the earth on its foundations. It can never be moved. And I like this verse above it. He makes his winds, his messengers, flames of fire, his servants. This is always written funny. And I think the Lord put these two together for that reason. There's something in here. But quickly on that. He makes his angels spirits, his ministers a flame of fire. See, who makes winds his angels, flames of fire his ministers. Or, conversely, who made his angels from the wind, and his ministers flames of fire. So that's how you read that. While I was flipping to that, you see this Psalm 104 has the ministers of flaming fire, and that is confirmed in Hebrews 1. And so I was flipping to Hebrews 1 to read that in my Heart Bible, and the Lord stopped me at 11. And I started to read this part, which always reminds me of the Apocryphal. And the Lord was showing me, okay, maybe we should break some of this off. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph, and worshipped leaning upon the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel, and gave commandment concerning his bones. This is Exodus. Why they use the word departing is because departure is not the word for rapture, and they like to make that out to be something else. I digress. This little bit here where they get to tell their children everything before they die is a holy precept. I know that because that's what the Apocrypha are. They are the last will and testament of these men. Oftentimes. And all these people. All these have a testament like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and everybody else. And would you be surprised to learn they tell of Christians and the rapture and the second coming? So that's why we're going to read that stuff. But on this point, where you have to tie this Joseph, who's he's not even really an Old Testament character, because Old Testament's associated with the law. He's a pre-law character. The law doesn't come until after 400 years later. The thing about Hebrews is, this is a very meaty chapter. It ends, these are all reports of faith. From the Old Testament and beyond. Again, Joseph would be sold by his brothers to Egypt, where he would become second in command to the Pharaoh. And then a famine would strike, and so God would send all these people to Joseph in Egypt into servitude. But they were treated very, very well, as we'll see, until the very, very end. And that was 400 years. And then the law came. So these people have a relationship with God. And God always shows his relationship through love. So Jacob most loved Rachel and had his most loved children from both. This was his youngest child. And these are his children from his old age. Joseph was just particularly a peculiar individual that was loved also by God. And that's why everybody hated him. And this is how he ties mostly into Jesus. You'll notice that you can't call Joseph a Jew. Judah is his brother. So the modern day people do. Judah's the royal tribe. So they just sort of co-opt the nickname of Judah. But Joseph is Joseph. Joseph is equal to Judah in that regard. And maybe even a little bit more because Joseph was so well loved by God. It reminds you of his Technicolor Dreamcoat and how God not only loves color but shows his fingerprint in it. And it's probably just like the bow in the sky that promises he won't destroy us with water next time but by fire is a rainbow. I bet you this coat was probably more a rainbow. The end of this long report of testimony of faith, incidences of these pre-Jesus characters, it says, and all these, having obtained a good report through faith, receive not the promise. God having provided some better thing for us, that they, without us, should not be made perfect. So this brings not so much about Joseph. I think it's Joseph's testimony will tie it all into Jesus on its own. But here Paul's doing it. He's tying all these people into Jesus and their testimony into what it really means for us. You see, what's going on now has never been done before and never will be done again. These people lived before this time. Some of them lived before the law. Some of them, Job might have been a pre-flood story. And God's always been living, and he's always had his people. And by faith, they were always following the invisible God, aiming for a clear conscience and such, praying and worshiping even. But even then, just something better for us. Let's talk about when Joseph comes up in Genesis. This is 37, and this is Israel. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons. Now, you know Israel was like the most blessed man in the history of God. And that man loved Joseph. Now, how did that kid get sold to slavery, and say, like, wait a second, don't you guys know who I am? Well, it's because Joseph, he was a holy person. He endured it. And we don't get too much, but I will show you what we do get. At least we'll begin with it. I'll read some of this, most of it actually. I'll skip a lot. Don't think I'm going to read it all. But we get down to the main part here. The Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. Well, notice that's in a sentence about him being in jail. So we got to suss that out. And this is why he's a very Christian character, because we don't do a lot of ruling in the Age of Grace. But you can see right from the very start, the Lord was with Joseph. Side note, he was sold to the Ishmaelites. So this is like way before the Quran. The Ishmaelites are the Islam. This is the Hagar, I believe it was, Ishmael. That's who they are. And that's who his brother sold him to. And he took him to Egypt. And it was just all by the hand of God, really. So that will all be sussed out. But, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from I'm not going to read all this, yada, yada, yada. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. Some of these words aren't really proper. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house and all that he owned, and put him in his charge. It came about that from the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned, in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. This is huge. We'll talk about it in the Apocryphal. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph. Now God doesn't make the holy men handsome so they'll be desired, but tested by the desire, because God's not going to have, unhealthy people walking around. They're going to be attractive. When he'll talk about it. It's interesting. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" Now, that's actually Psalm 51, verse 4. "Against thee only have I sinned, and done this evil in thy sight, that thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be clear when thou judgest." So he knows he sins against God, even if he's, there's a guy involved and a woman and everybody else, but he's sinning against God because he's a holy man. And she begins to get it so that she gets his coat, and he won't, she won't. And then holding the coat, tells a story to her husband, who believes her. And then she's, "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to make sport of me. This is what your slave did to me," and his anger burned. So he put him in jail. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended his kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. And the chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in jail. This gets a little bit twisted, because he stays in jail for a long time, and other people join him, and they have dreams, and he interprets them for him. And then he comes out, and then he gets reestablished up at the top of Egypt, and then his brothers are sent to him, and then he has this really interesting reconvene with his brothers where he's mad at them. They don't know who he is. He's like a king now. He's like 29, and they're just like kind of peasants. They're hungry and they're coming for food, and he recognizes them and he gives them a super hard time. And then they finally reconcile, and it goes on. And that's pretty much the end of the patriarch story, actually, when it comes to the Old Testament, other than the prophecies of the Lord being with those who he loves. In case you wondered about that, this is some evidence. These are Joseph had prophetic dreams. He had dreams that he would rule over his brothers, and he would come down the stairs and stand up and he would tell them. So yeah, they hated him. They hated him even more because of his dreams. And this is a very sort of thing that it's envy, and it's kind of not our place. And you can see here that this is Joseph, the favorite son. Now this is going to go back into me relating this to the Apocrypha now. When you go into the Apocrypha, I can't even tell you how to get there, because you're going to end up on something like this, which is basically the Kabbalah, Gnostics, mysticism, Jewish texts telling crazy stories. It's impossible. You can't. And I'll be able to show you at some point. But next part is I'm going to read this mostly, and then we're going to jive it all together. I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, Reuben was the firstborn. This is why he has many mothers. Because Reuben ended up sleeping, I can't remember which one, with one of these three or something. So he had to get another, everything had to restart. Reuben lost his kingship, that's why he went to Judah. And he didn't kick him out of his house or nothing, he just took away his kingship. And then, well, there's room for more. Next one is not going to be reading this stuff, no. It's going to be reading the Apocrypha.